and it results in a homicide because people are armed. So this is something we have to address. It's so incredibly critical for our young people. So I am going to now bring up our three incredible panelists. First is Shannon Hill. She is the violence prevention specialist at the St. Paul Public Schools, and we have been working on a 3-year project with them to improve their violence prevention systems. Secondly is David Riedman. He is the founder of the K-12 school shooting database. He is a close collaborator of ours, and it was actually his data that was the foundation for our new database. Yes, that one. And then Rudy Perez, who is the president of the National Association of School Resource Officers, now located here. We actually met for the first time on the Dr. Phil show after the Uvalde shooting a couple years ago. So the way this is going to work is I am going to ask a few questions to get them started. You have note cards in your folder. Just because we're doing so much in the day and we only have like 45 minutes, passing the mic just seemed too tricky. But if you have a question, you can write it on the note card, just kind of stick it up, and one of the wonderful students will grab it and bring it up to me, and I will get through as many of those questions as possible. If we don't get to your question, I still have it written down, which is nice. So I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do, but we're going to somehow try to answer questions that we didn't get to during the panel because there's just too much to talk about. So, David, I want to start with you. What do you want to tell us about kind of the trends in gun violence at K-12 schools? In my opinion, there is nobody in this country that actually has a better grasp of what is happening in schools with guns on a daily basis.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that on?
Everybody here. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, David Riedman, the K-12 school shooting database, a little bit different from the Violence Project homicide database because it is every shooting on a school, anywhere on school property, but it doesn't necessarily need to kill someone. Could be when somebody's wounded, or in many cases, when nobody's shot. The shots miss. But that's inches between somebody living and having no victims in some cases. So I just wanted to lay out kind of what's happened at schools so far this year, because it's kind of staggering. We get lost, we think about big incidents, but the very first day back at school in January at Perry High in rural Iowa, there was a student who came into the school with a shotgun and a pistol, and he killed the principal and a 14-year-old student, and he wounded 7 others. Then he killed himself, police officer. On the very first day of school to start off, it's 2020. Just about 3 weeks after that, in San Diego, there was diverted school shooting. So there was a student that had access to multiple weapons in his house. He had multiple, what would be classified as assault rifles, but there were also rocket-propelled grenades in the house. And there was tips from classmates that said that this kid is going to commit a shooting at the San Diego. Averted. Right after that, in Marymount, Ohio, very affluent area, the highest performing high school in Ohio, there was a student who was talking to an adult in Colorado, and the two of them were plotting a school shooting together. And the adult was going to bring the guns to the school. And it was tips from other students that averted that very real planned attack that was days away from taking place. About a month after that, in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, really rural area, there's a student who wanted to commit a school shooting, said he was obsessed with school shootings. He'd had his parents take him to the site of a prior school shooting. And he talked in his journal about the power of being in that place. He couldn't get a real rifle, so he got an air rifle. And he took an air rifle, multiple pipe bombs, and he tried to build a dirty bomb. He bought radiological material online that you can use for testing lab. And he had a pipe bomb with radiological material in his backpack. And he went to the school with an air rifle that had been modified to be able to fire one bullet. And he was killed by a police officer there outside the school. And then, of course, at Appalachia High School in Georgia, to start this new school year, there's a planned attack. So that's Planned school shootings either happened, could have been much worse, narrowly averted. But with the broader gun violence, just this week in schools, yesterday there was a domestic dispute at drop-off at an elementary school, and an off-duty police officer got into an altercation with his domestic partner and fired shots outside of the elementary school. The day before in Alabama, during student pickup, a parent got out of the car. Their 6-year-old kid found their gun in the car and started firing shots. Because a man was killed at the homecoming game in Louisiana on Saturday. 2 people were shot at an elementary school baseball game on Sunday. There were shots fired in the parking lot in Mississippi during morning classes earlier this week, and a school bus driving had a bullet break all the students inside. That's just the stuff from this. That's pretty wild. It's unbelievable, but just the scope of gun violence impacting students every single day is really overwhelming.
Thanks, David. That was sobering. Shannon, I'm going to move to you. So Shannon's in schools on a daily basis. She is running around kind of de-escalating things. Shannon, just being in schools, what are you seeing in terms of trends in violence? What are your thoughts on that?
Yep. I would say for me, social media threats. In St. Paul Public School, we take all threats serious. And what I mean about that is even if kids are busting a joke, we take it serious. We go into depths, figure out what is the root of you making that threat. The other piece I would say, even when a threat is found not to be credible, there are still real consequences in St. Paul Public Schools. And what I mean about that, we have students' right responsibility handbook. Some of you may be familiar with that if you were in St. Paul Public Schools. The other part of this is that we de-escalate different groups or individuals. Why are you making these threats? A lot of times we figure out kids don't understand each other. It's the communication. Since we use social media to communicate and to try to figure out how can we make the other group or the individual feel threatened, like we doing this in real life action.
Thank you. Rudy, what are your thoughts on kind of the role of school resource officers in terms of gun violence prevention, and maybe also touch on all those online threats that we are seeing and how officers are having to respond to those on a daily basis?
Definitely, for sure. First, thank you for, Zach, can you hear me? 2, check. Did you get a check? Yep. All right. First of all, thank you for putting this on. It's good when you create a room with synergy. Everybody has the mentality that our kids have to graduate. That's our end goal, safely, right? To give you context of where I've been, I just spent 22 years in Los Angeles. One of my main goals was to work with Yale USD. We're talking about 500,000 students, 75,000 teachers, 1,500 locations, 710 miles of jurisdiction, and 1,500 locations. The threats are real. Everything these two just spoke about are absolutely real. And I believe the SRO world in Los Angeles at its peak was 590 police officers, full functioning agency that had to address just pursuits. The issue is real, and you can't deny it. And I think the ecosystem that we are establishing now, especially, has to have a police officer involved, and that's where the school resource officer is involved, properly trained, properly selected, properly equipped. And I think some of the biggest challenge that we're seeing is the digital threats that we're seeing, right? Whether it's a ransomware, whether your district is being ransomed, like Los Angeles got ransomed for millions and finally got their money, their information back. You've got to have infrastructure to address these issues, right? Because what it's doing is holding back the education process. A lot of people don't understand whether it's a crime, a digital crime, it's holding back educational dollars. And those are tied to places where your kids don't have computers, they don't have time or access for their certain playgrounds because there's a lockdown. All that it's to play. And I think having a properly trained school resource officers that has the ability to train and to work within that ecosystem is very crucial. I know we've had the debate about that, yes or no. I don't think, and in this world, as I was talking to Brian, one of the biggest things that hit me today is I responded to that call too. I was there to that call, and it just made it real to me to see that and to meet the parent. And that's failure. That's failure on our part. When you see that, it's failure on our part in so many ways. And I think we have to have the ability to work together, whether it's law enforcement or you do want an SRO, you don't want an SRO. There is a need for an SRO, and your ecosystem is going to need it in order for it to function. Thank you.
And just a reminder, write down your questions, raise them over your head. We want to know what you want to know. So David, what can you tell us about kind of who, what, when, where, why guns are going off in schools? What do you see most commonly?
That's what's interesting there. There are two very different things that, again, put together. One is deliberately led, and that's what you pay to do. And that's the situations that apply teenage boy, a district, trauma, with areas out was that way as you bond. That is the same laid out. There are about 230 different. That I've looked at, but that's all worship about. The majority of it, in your limbs, and let something out, and it can be constant and plastic. But it's in the center there, both something, and like that's like division. And once you found shots fired, everything goes into that acquisition. Whether it's one kid shot in parking lot, way, the ball game. There's a shooting every single thing that this year. High school football game, you have an enormous disruption. I did on research project last year, trying to understand why kids are there. So I looked at 700 cases on West Saw Camp. Most all of it, they carried gun in the backpack. They carried the gun cases because they're staring. And that's a because the same way that they're advertised guns, you carry the gun, Dutch. That's the same reason. For the civil argument turning itself.
So just one quick note. All right, we've got some really good questions coming in. Shannon, I think this one's for you. How is campus security used in the St. Paul public schools, and especially in light of getting rid of the SROs? Is that a challenge?
So the first thing that I want to say that the board, the school board district voted for our security, SROs to not be in the school. So that's the first thing. But what we did was we hired SSS. Those are the ones, the school support liaisons. That's within the school. Most of you guys may know them as the blue shirts. We teach them to build relationship. No matter who you bring into school, if you don't have a trusted relationship with our students, I don't care who you bring. You have to have somebody that the kids can trust. If you see something, we teach them, say something. And so I would say the best part of this job is having our SSL. They are community members. They are within our St. Paul Public Schools. Some of them are graduates of St. Paul Public Schools, but I said we teach them to build relationships.
Rudy, I think this one's for you. What do you think SROs can do that they maybe aren't doing as well today? And until we solve the, I'm just going to summarize. Should we be using gun detection systems in schools? Are those helpful or hurtful?
So there's two things at play here. Technology has improved so much, where I always say, if you're on an airplane, or what's something that we protect? We have an armed guard, we have glass protection, we have security officers there, we have panic buttons. We do this at banks all day long. Why can't we do it in schools that truly need the challenges? Now, do we want our schools to look like prisons? No, right? There is, in my opinion, there's now technology that can detect firearms that can be placed in your schools. A lot of the big AI machines are now, we're able to find some of the stuff that is going on in schools and finding guns on campuses. What was the other portion of the question?
What could SROs do better than what they're doing now?
Well, I think what SROs can do better is we have to, as administrations, as school districts, you got to get them the right training. And I continue to travel this country where I truly find SROs that have never had even anything to do with training. You're finding SROs that are involved in smart statistics, are involved in use of forces where they don't understand what a 504 plan or an IEP plan is, or they don't understand what a student with disability is or the manifestation of that. So I am coming across a lot of states that don't have proper training, and that's where NASRO's coming in, where we are really fine-tuning our training to be specifically selected, properly trained in the world of the education world. And there's a lot of times that those worlds haven't met, and I think now we are in a better place. If you need training, please connect with me, and I can direct you. I am happy with the kind of national training we are establishing now. The COPS office is providing a lot of grants for this, and soon in Minnesota, I'm thinking maybe the first week or two in December, we'll be hosting one here that's going to be hosted by the DOJ, by the training department.
Thank you. I know one thing James and I see in our work sometimes with SROs is when there's a threat, you have to have law enforcement investigate to see if there's a gun, to see if it's a real imminent danger. A lot of times it's not, right? They don't actually have a weapon and a crime hasn't actually been committed. And then kind of the role of the police is done. And then what's next, I think, is the piece, right? How does that information get transferred? Because you still had a young person who said something, scary and is probably feeling some way, and whose job is it to figure out where that threat is coming from and to intervene to make sure it doesn't happen again when they do actually have a weapon. And so what does that communication look like, and how do you close those loops? And law enforcement being a critical part of that, but not the only part of that, right? David, I'm going to have you, number one, weigh in on the technology in schools kind of question and the detection stuff, because I know you've done a lot of work in that space. And then also question, what is the data source for your K-12 school database, and how do you keep from missing things like near misses?
Yeah, two very good questions. Gun detection is an interesting topic, because TSA is the model or the way that can work. TSA is also incredibly expensive. It's a multi-billion-dollar budget to provide services to about 400 airports. And those airports have people go in once, get on a plane, and they never leave. When you go to a school, people go in and out of the school multiple times every single day. A lot of schools, like in Southern California, don't have hallways. You have individual classroom buildings. You have mega campuses all over the Southwest and Texas and the South, where you have combined schools, where Appalachia High, the planned attack was. That's a 2 million square foot campus with a high school, an elementary school, middle school, multiple different athletic fields. A perimeter fence would be 2.5 miles around that campus. So we have to understand that a campus is not like an airport. An airport you go into once, a fixed number of people, and there are about 2 million people that fly on a regular day. There's 60 million students. By my estimate, it would be about $3.5 trillion to have TSA-style security at every school in the country. So we need to think about how realistic is that. And then as kids go to schools every day and go through security, they know exactly how to get weapons past security. There have been multiple shootings at schools that had metal detectors, that had secure entries. In Dallas, there was a fatal shooting inside a classroom this year because the kid knew that if he went in a side door, there's no metal detector at that side door. But kids go in and out of the side doors. It's a 4,000 student school, and you have to go in and out of it all day long. So we've got to understand schools are complicated. Campuses are all different. People need to go in and out of them all day long, and you have thousands of people. So we've got to look at ways to keep the gun from ever getting to the campus or figuring out why somebody habitually carries it. On the second question on the school shooting database, This is all open source information that I get through Newspoints. I have a large network now where when things happen, people are calling and texting and emailing me about incidents in their neighborhood, incidents in their communities, their schools locking down, a threat that their kids heard. It's kind of an overwhelming amount of information. But there are certainly incidents that I miss because they're not reported to the media. Somebody doesn't let me know. I don't know. And with near misses, many of those are never reported and captured because these are young children, often elementary school kids and middle school kids. They, have their education records, their criminal records are all protected. So there's a huge amount of unknown. This is probably a much bigger problem, and that's very scary.
Thanks, David. And I think that's a point that we don't always think about. The most likely perpetrator of gun violence on a school grounds is a student of that school, right? So they know the security procedures. They're going in and out of them every day. They know the building setup. They know where the SROs are, right? They know what door can be propped open. These are not individuals unfamiliar with this school. So it becomes really hard when the perpetrator is an insider. All those security apparatuses just don't work as well as when you're trying to protect yourself from an outsider, right? Insider is really different. But the nice thing about an insider is that you see them on a daily basis and you know them and you can build relationships, right? Prevention becomes much more possible because it's students of the school. Shannon, there's so many questions. We're not even going to touch that many. Can you talk about interventions that the St. Paul Public Schools are using to proactively address upstream factors that contribute to gun violence? Oh boy. Sorry, streamers.
So can you give me that?
Things that St. Paul Public Schools is doing to proactively address kind of the upstream things, the poverty, the trauma, the unstable housing, that sort of stuff that contributes to violence down the line.
So right now we are in the process. I'm working with James and Jillian. We're building a care process. So with the care process, it stands for collaborate, assess, respond, evaluate. Instead of using threat assessment, we're going to start using care assessment, a little bit more friendly. We're going to go back to start looking at it at the elementary base. We are training all of our staff at St. Paul Public Schools around this care assessment to be proactive instead of reactive. Getting service to wrap around our kids at a younger age instead of wait till you get in high school. And now we're pouring all these resources into high school when they're getting ready to go out into the real world. And this trauma has now gone since they've been there since elementary. So we're going back. So we're going to involve our community members, getting resources from community members. What service do you have around your school? Getting people involved where everybody is at the table talking about these kids and we're not working in silos. We have learned that moving forward, working in silos is what's causing this gun violence I would say, threats or whatever within our kids because we're holding back information. But we said, I knew this. What if I would have said all the what ifs is not going to stop what we're doing now if we're not coming to the table to talk. So we will be training everybody within St. Paul Public Schools on this care process to prevent violence.
And I'll note the intervention plans. I think we sometimes think like, what's an intervention plan for a student? Shannon is phenomenal at these because she will sit down, get to know the student, get to know the family, get to the root cause of the issue. And some of the care plans are like, this student needs to be met when they're getting off the bus because they get overwhelmed by all the people coming in. And then someone needs to walk them to breakfast because if they skip breakfast, then they're cranky the rest of the day and they're more likely to be aggressive, right? That's a care plan, right? Like that gets at the root causes. And that's something you don't have to spend $1 million to create, right? Like that's just a human being connecting with that student on a daily basis. So Shannon's been it's blowing my mind what these care plans can look like when they're really individualized and really focused on that kid and what that kid needs. Rudy, how do you deal with parent pushback for things like directed searches if there's concern of a firearm? There have been recent cases of parents suing school districts for searches and things. And is that something that's of concern?
So I use this mic. Are we good?
How about I do this, man? I'll just use, you can give me the third one too if you want. I'm good with that too. All right, great. I'll use both of them just in case. So addressing searches, right? Police officers will always stand on what the Constitution is going to tell us to do. That is the best answer I can always tell you. I've come across a lot of school districts and some of the challenges we see at the national levels where police officers are being weaponized, and they're being weaponized incorrectly, used incorrectly to, hey, you got to go grab that student. He has a cell phone we don't want to deal with. And we think he has a gun too. Well, what is it, right? And it's very frustrating to get to a point where you're seeing the challenges of what a righteous search is. Now, we have made contact. One thing that's most important, education is first. Education is first, safety always. So if there's a process when you have a well-trained officer and for whatever reason you believe you have to make a search, the well-trained officer is going to do this appropriately. And I believe it should be done without shaming the student, right? There's still a process of this student, because a lot of times we find a lot of replicas. In Los Angeles, when my officers conduct that, we found a lot of replicas, right? But we'll stand on constitutional policing first. Second is we're going to make sure we have the appropriate team member with me too, because there's a lot of times where more administrators, remember this, case law and national case law gives you more power than what we have. So it's almost easier to use your administration, but if you know for a fact, going, look, there's a gun involved, then allow your police officer to do the searches appropriately. Dealing with parents, you know what? There's times it's not easy for everybody, and there isn't a parent that go, why are you searching my kid? Well, unfortunately, your kid has a gun, and I've been in those conversations where, not my kid. Well, let me show you what we've recovered, right? We still lead with empathy. Unfortunately, we will have to do certain things, and there has to be consequences. Sometimes the juvenile justice system, I was speaking to a friend recently, which was very wise, the juvenile justice system is broken, but we have a family home challenge, and we have family members that need help to maintain discipline in these homes.
Thank you. You've got about 3 questions here about anonymous tip lines. Do they work? Do they work better with relationships, without relationships? When we're getting, David, when you're talking about tips coming in that are preventing school shootings, how are those coming in? Are they anonymous or through trusted adults? So if any of you want to touch on tip lines.
Yeah, I'll touch briefly on averted school shootings. There's a paper, which there are a number of academics in the room. Like, who are the academics here? So the paper's been in peer review for 2.5 years, even though it has critically important findings about 125 averted school shootings. So these were plots where somebody, a student in most cases, had intent, capability, and they were trying to obtain weapons. So they had a plan, had a manifesto, had a hit list, had a date set. These were truly averted attacks. Found 125 of those cases from 2018 to 2022 when this paper was written. 85% of those averted cases came from a tip from a classmate. Only 2 of the 125 came from a formal threat assessment team. Now, part of that is the formal threat assessment team may do a lot of work that never gets published. But it just shows the importance that students saying something to a trusted adult doesn't cost anything. And it is the way that I spoke about those 800 different cases of guns found in schools. More than half of those were a tip from another student saying somebody's got a gun in their backpack. To Rudy's point on replicas, because there are a lot of policy people in the room here, I don't think anybody's paying attention to replica guns. You can go on Amazon right now, and for $100, you can buy any model of real handgun. It looks exactly like a Glock or 6 Sauer or whatever model handgun you like. It is identical without close inspection that it shoots a BB instead of a real gun. And so if a kid is being victimized, if a kid is scared, if a kid wants to kind of assert their toughness, they can carry a replica gun at school. They can post the pictures of the replica gun on social media. And that there's no way for police to know whether that's a real gun or a replica gun. These replica guns are being sold at Amazon, all the major retailers. You don't need an ID, but they are not protected by the Second Amendment. They are a toy, and they could be banned tomorrow. And that's a very simple policy thing. Why should kids have guns that look exactly like real guns? And it's impossible for police officers because a kid points one at you and a kid ends up getting killed. And there are cases of that all over the country.
Tip lines, I believe in them. In LA, we ended up pushing, after 2020, we were big on tip lines. And David's correct. Probably 90% of the tips that we received of a gun came from a student, which comes to what you spoke about, having trusted relationships with your law enforcement officer. And that we used to have anonymous tips boxes in their offices, and we would have an app. We actually created the app where that app actually notifies the school resource officer, the administration, that there's a possible gun. It becomes anonymous. Is say something, see something, say something. What is it? See something, say something, so we can do something. And that's the big challenge. I've come to the conclusion, when you're not at the table and an administration or a good ecosystem, you're going to be on the menu. So it's important to come together with technology, with your school resource officers and your administration to make that ecosystem.
Just to echo what both of them said, I would say the tip line does work. I don't have the data in front of me, but we do receive a lot of tips through our anonymous tip line. You can remain anonymous. A lot of kids see things, like I said, on social media, or they see things in the community. They will send like a picture of it, post it, and you can remain anonymous, and we still go out to find out, is it credible, what's going on, and everything like that. So I say it does work.
To leave you one thing, the biggest challenge with that and the technology is the follow through. It's the follow up. Everybody gets some. Everybody, oh, we got another one. And everybody thinks, it's a big nothing again. It's a big nothing till it isn't, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to have infrastructure for your tip lines. If you're going to put it out there, you got to have somebody, because I've seen districts pay millions of dollars because they knew it was going to happen. They could have prevented it, and they didn't.
Yeah, that's one thing that emerged from our research as well, is that for all of the school mass shootings that we studied, somebody knew it was going to happen. I think it was every single one. And that was typically a student who had told another student. Sometimes there was cases where 50 or 60 kids knew that it was maybe going to happen, and nobody told an adult. And if you think about why you don't tell an adult, you don't want to overreact. You don't want to be the snitch. You don't want to get your friend expelled and in trouble, right? So, and that's on us to be like, how do we take that information in a soft way that it's not just like, okay, we're going to send this kid to prison because your friend, it's how do we say, like, we're worried about you, we're concerned about you. How do we build that school climate in schools? How do we build those relationships? And there's a number of folks from Sandy Hook Promise in the room, and I just want to give a shout out to their tip line, which we talk a lot about in the books. Their anonymous reporting system. A crisis counselor responds to any tip that comes in through that line within 1 minute and starts de-escalating and talking to the person providing the tip. It's an incredible system. Don't know why we don't have it nationally across the country. So many good questions here. David, what do you see different patterns of rural versus urban versus suburban school violence?
That's an excellent question. Whoever asked that, thank you.
It is.
Because, again, it breaks into these two separate pieces. There are planned attacks at schools, and there is gun violence from habitual gun carriers. Planned attacks at schools. 18 of the 25 school shootings with the highest number of casualties were in rural communities. Appalachia, Georgia this year, small rural community. Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, small rural community. Perry, Iowa, the school's 400 students at the middle and high school, 50 miles outside of Des Moines. So the planned attacks at schools throughout history, I've looked at them since the 1960s, overwhelmingly are small rural communities. The habitual gun carrying is most often in schools in urban and suburban areas. And a lot of that is the most economically disadvantaged schools. I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago breaking down the shootings that had happened in that school year. And overwhelmingly, they were the schools that were the bottom 10% performers in their state. So it is the most vulnerable students who are also subjected to gun violence in those schools. And so there are a lot of stereotypes and bias around that. But what's interesting, or what's tragic, I mean, not interesting, is that it's bystander students that end up getting shot. So it's somebody who's just at that school. They weren't even involved in that problem. They just happen to be walking across the parking lot, and they end up in the middle of the gunfire. So there is the habitual gun carrying problem impacts the most disadvantaged, vulnerable students in the country. The planned attacks happen in these communities where people say it could never happen here, where we say we know every single person. The Marymount, Ohio planned attack. Marymount, Ohio is Mayberry. It 100% is. The school police officer, a police officer goes out and interviews the kid and his father. And he's got the white press shirt and the top hat, and he probably didn't have bullets in his gun. Like, there hadn't been a homicide in that city in years. So they didn't take that interview seriously. The police officer interviews the kid the morning before he gets arrested, says, oh, this sounds like a joke between kids. And then when the FBI was investigating, because there was interstate communication between an adult and a child, and they realized there's actually a planned attack happening, then they stepped in and arrested the kid, and it was a major plot. But there's this mentality that it doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen in our community.
Shannon, a question for you. There's been several significant events that have happened in the St. Paul Public Schools recently. A couple of homicides within school or near school property. This question is, how does the staff at school get support after something like that happens? And how does this level of gunfire and violence affect kind of staff and teachers in the building trying to do their work on a daily basis?
So what I can say is we have a trauma-informed team where our social worker responds, or our psychologist, they go out as a team and support each individual team if they need individual one-on-one. We have Sand Creek, where within St. Paul Public Schools that come through our benefit and insurance. So if you want to, go outside of St. Paul Public School to receive help, you can do that as well. So you have many options that's open to you if you need that support. We have a team that responds to the school. If a tragedy happened within the school, outside the school, that we send them out, or you can do Sand Creek as well. Great. The last 15 minutes, I'm going to shift towards questions that are a little bit more like prevention, hopeful, because I think we got the dark side out. So we've got a lot of parents in the room. I have 3 kids in elementary school. It's incredibly anxiety provoking to think about all this stuff. And this is to all 3 of you, what can parents do to prevent school violence with their own kid, with the school that their kid goes to, within the broader community? What can everybody in this room be doing? So the first thing is teaching our kids first about safety. Understand what safety look like. How much time are they spending on social media? How much time are they watching TV? What type of video games are they playing? Because a lot of this influence our kids. The other part is a lot of our kids don't feel connected. And what I mean about that, if you don't feel a part of your school, you're not going to put in nothing. So the first thing is making sure we get our kids to be a part of where they at. 6 hours, 7 hours a day, because if you're not a part of that, you're not going to contribute to the safety of the school. Get our kids integrated in their community, taking them to the community center, taking them to different activities within the area where they live at. So I would say that's the first part. And if parents are seeing things early or even later, please inform the school, talk to the school. Answer the calls when the school is calling you. Come to the parent-teacher conference. Be involved within the school. That's the big key part that we really need, is parent participation within our schools.
Being involved, I think, as a parent, if you create moments and times where students and parents are interacting in your schools in these conversations of having safety and what does that look like, I think it's important. Obviously, climate and culture is very important to understand as educators, and I know we're moving around that to address challenges, and wraparound services is important. This is a free one for you. This is free resources, free. This is big for you guys. There's an organization called rocketrules.org. Rocket Rules is a phenomenal lady that her name is Bunny. You can let her know if you send her an email, say, hey, Rudy's sending me. we created a book, and some of the biggest challenges, how do we address active shooters for young kids? What do we do? What does that look like, right? So we created a book with rocket rules, and it's the sense of safety. And it talks about your sense of safety. You know, if we started talking to kids from 1st to 3rd grade, and the program brings an interactive dog that comes into your classroom. It's all free, and it's pretty an amazing group. Your police officer can come into play. There's a curriculum to it. Phenomenal work. But we ended up doing it. We pulled in some professionals, mental health workers, and some doctors going, how do we talk about violence without traumatizing our young kids, right? That was a big challenge. So we engaged in the conversation of sense of safety. What is it that you see that's wrong, right? And they can circle if that's a fire, if that's a firearm, who do I contact? I contact an adult. Or if I'm walking to and from school and we have a homeless encampment, how to go around it? So these young little things that's beginning the culture of safety is how we're doing a lot of early prevention, early intervention. It's a phenomenal program. We put a lot of work into it, and it's free.
Wonderful.
Yeah, for parents. How many parents are on Discord? How many people in here are on Discord?
There's some.
Every single kid that you have is on Discord. And that is a place that is mostly harmless. It's a place where you can have set communities and chats and video chats and audio chats, mostly around video games. So if you have your video game team, you all get on Discord and you can coordinate on there outside of the game environment. But Discord is unmoderated, distributed servers that are encrypted. There is no way for the FBI to look at anything that's on Discord. So the Perry High School shooter was in a community called School Shooting Massacres. If his parents looked at his Discord app, they'd see that he's a member of School Shooting Massacres, and he's posting every day talking about his plan to shoot up the school. And they would see that he posted messages and videos to get support the morning of the shooting and from the bathroom before he went out and killed his classmates. So parents need to know the apps that their students are on, that their children are on, and know what they're doing on the apps and know who they're talking to. And then most of it is harmless. But if they're in School Shooting Massacres, there might be a problem. Along that line, check the kid's backpack. What are they taking to school? How did the Appalachia High School shooter put an AR-15 inside a poster board and take it on the school bus and carry it around with him at school for 2 hours before the shooting started? How did his parent not notice that he's leaving and his rifle, that's his prized possession that he got for Christmas, is probably inside the poster board that he's taking to the bus? Parents need to check their kids' backpacks. And with that, block every single gun that's inside the house, because a kid or their friend can take it, or somebody can break into your house or car and take it. So most shootings at schools, these fights that escalate or the planned attacks, are teenagers who can't buy a gun. If they can't go buy a gun, it means they took it from a lawful owner. And if they took it from a lawful owner, that means that adult didn't lock and secure that weapon. And the last piece on this is ask if their friends or other kids in the school are having problems. I think that is the powerful thing. Kids get forgotten. The Appalachia High School shooter, 14-year-old kid, social services had interviewed him and his family 6 times. He'd been at 5 different schools in the last 6 years. His parents had both been arrested for domestic abuse and drugs and other things. There were kids in those communities that knew that was a student who needed help, knew that was a person who needed help. So if parents can find a way through their kids to do something for the vulnerable students in the community, there's a powerful, powerful TED Talk online from Aaron Stark. And he talks about when he was plotting to be a school shooter because he was mad at his parents because he was abused by his parents because he didn't have any other outlet and he was homeless. But it was a classmate's family who let him sleep in their shed and gave him clean clothes and gave him some food. That act of kindness showed him his life mattered, so he didn't commit the shooting. So every single parent has the opportunity to help someone else.
Thanks, David. Go ahead.
One more thing. I really think parents if you're connected with them, the digital citizenship is massive. If you don't have a connection within your police department, you got a detective that can talk about these social media apps. If you need contact, you need information, I developed something in Los Angeles. We met with parents all day long. If you want to have a forum with parents only, and we'll come in here and we'll talk about these apps. And I promise you, there's every time a parent that says, my kid doesn't have a cell phone. Well, let me find your kid. Let me tell me who he is a little bit, and I will find him. and there is a digital citizenship, and parents have to know. Like some parents tell me all the time, well, can I grab his phone? Well, did you buy it? Then yes. It's all yours, right? And well, we start going down a different conversation. But if we need to put something together about the digital citizenship, it is so important. As David said, there's so many clues in there that you can pull the professionals in there that can actually give you a hand and say, what is this translating to them?
Yeah, and if it's not a school shooting, it might be cyberbullying.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or,
that's right.
or abuse or suicide.
That's right.
Yeah.
So all the way through extortion. And I can't tell you how many cases we used to find in LA all the time going, that kid doesn't belong to that parent. She's being sextorted. It's unbelievable. It would scare you, the stories that we have. But this is how we get to it. This is how we prevent it.
Okay. And I would just add psychologist hat on, right? Things like talk to your kid and start early and don't be afraid to have conversations about gun violence. I mean, these kids are running through drills. They are rehearsing being shot and killed, and we don't talk to them about it. They should be having conversations every single time that happens about how scary it was or not scary it was or how that made them feel. Train yourself in crisis intervention and suicide prevention. Know how to ask questions about suicidality, both for your kid and their community and other friends. Notice when someone's in a crisis and know how to use those de-escalation skills. In addition to storing your own weapon safely, talk to your peers who aren't. We know from research the most effective way to change safe storage practices is through conversations, right? That's how you sort of change norms and be willing to have those conversations. And then I also just add that we know the kids that end up doing this are so isolated, they're so alone, right? And so programs around inclusivity and connection and making sure your kid is pulling in that one kid who's sitting alone in the lunchroom, it's amazing how far that can go in young people's lives. So don't forget all those kind of small, little interpersonal things we can all be doing on a daily basis, I think, for our communities.
I think it's important to, and I get a lot of parents saying, I don't know when to talk to my kid, or I don't know when to talk. Well, you know when the best time to talk to your kid is? When you're on the road.
Yeah.
And you're on the freeway and they're talking to you and they're going, blah, 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 blah. You're like, whoa, that's a lot of information. Keep driving. Keep driving. They're telling you, they're talking to you because they want you to hear it. And there was times and time and place when my mom kept driving. We're like, we missed the exit like 4 times. What the heck's going on here? That's because she was listening. She goes, oh, okay. And kids will tell you the world because they want you. They want structure. They want an adult to give them guidance. I promise you we do. I was the ADD kid. I was a 504 plan. I was that kid that came from another country that had, English is my second language. I promise you we want you to know that. And there is success in the work that you guys are doing.
So we've only got about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to go to each of you. We talked about parents. I'm going to have you talk more broadly from your perspective about how do we prevent violence in schools. Your question, and this could include, we have a question about prosecuting parents who don't store safely, questions about how community partners can be a part of the solution. So any of that you want to bring in, sort of your takeaway thoughts on prevention of shootings in school grounds. David, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
As Jill said, every single one of these planned attacks, and in most cases, if there's a fight that is escalating, there are signs that it's escalating. There are signs of conflict. There are previous fights. There's tons of information available before anything happens on a campus. What we don't have is the systems in place to connect this information in a meaningful way. The school shooting in Georgia in September was the most preventable shooting that you could ever have. But when you have education records in 5 different school districts. You have 6 different county social services. You have 5 different law enforcement agencies that had contact. Each one of them had a piece of the problem. That information altogether would have prevented the attack. And that's exactly what we did after 9/11. We saw that all of these different intelligence agencies all knew a piece of that plot, but in isolation, none of it was significant. Every single one of these school shootings is another 9/11 that's happening because there is not federal guidance and there's not a unified structure for information reporting, information collection, and information analysis. The government doesn't even keep track of how many shots are fired on campuses every year. Like, I have to do that at my house.
Like literally in his living room by himself.
So we don't have to have this system. The information is there. We just need to do something with it and take action.
So I would say just make sure that we all are talking, as they keep saying, not working in silos, building these relationships, trusted, lasting relationship with students. That's the biggest key. And people have to understand that we have to build rapport with our students. If we want to get information, as they're saying, you have to build trusted, lasting relationship. Talking to the kids every day, greeting the kids. We wouldn't realize kids will give you information as soon as they get to school. They will be texting you. I know they talk about don't give your personal cell phone number. That's fine. Give your work cell phone number out. Make sure they got your email address. Kids will send you stuff offline when you're at work, when you're not at work, sharing information with you. That's how a lot of the information I get is through my work phone, through my work emails, kids telling me, going out to the community centers, working with the kids in the community center, not just inside while I'm at St. Paul Public Schools. I go out and build relationship with kids. Kids be excited to see you when they see you in the mall, the stores, just because they trust you as that trusted adult, and they will give you what you want.
Well, the number one thing I would tell you is when we met the first time was in Dr. Phil, and we got to talk to Anna. She was the mother of a young lady she lost in Uvalde. And today we've had Brian here. You have to learn from the failures. You have to learn from bad policy. Just because something looks new and it sounds pretty doesn't mean it will fit your ecosystem. Each of you in here have a different place, and it works differently. But I'm telling you right now, if you want to keep your kids safe, learn from the failures. We failed them. We keep hearing of failures as David talks. Learn from the failures. Have strong policies. Have a good ecosystem. That's how we keep our kids safe.
I would say you can change the method, but don't change the message. Some methods need to be changed, but not the message.
And the last piece is we don't have to accept that this is the status quo.
Yeah.
I mean, I woke up this morning
Correct.
to see that 10 people were shot in Orlando right by my house last night in a Halloween celebration. And I live a mile from the Pulse nightclub. And we are just accepting that every single day somewhere in the country,
Sure.
a kid is going to be shot at a school or a gun's going to be fired at a school. And there are going to be 2 to 3 planned attacks that happen this year. We don't have to take that status quo from the last 60 years and say that's how it's going to be for the next decade.
It's a great note to end on. It's so easy to become numb. I mean, part of it is I think you have to become numb if you're going to sort of wake up every day and keep going, because it's so overwhelming and it's so much. But hopefully after today, you feel less numb and more empowered to make some changes. So thank you so much to our incredible panel. Good enough.